Buffalo Bills are the favorites to win the Super Bowl, but what are the potential stumbling blocks to be mindful of? I'm breaking those down today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino from the Draft Network, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Happy Friday to you, and thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day. As a reminder, we are free and available to you on all platforms, including YouTube. I'm excited for today's conversation. We don't have a practice to respond to like we've had for the last several episodes. And so this opens up an opportunity for us to get into some other items regarding the Buffalo Bills. And after a long offseason of talking about the transactions that the Buffalo Bills have made to craft the 2022 roster, we've come to a pretty good point with this football team. I've painted a pretty rosy picture of what this team can do this offseason. And justifiably so. The Bills are widely considered the favorites to win the Super Bowl. USA Today predicted them to go 15-2. There's a lot of hype around this team. It's arguably the best roster the Bills have assembled yet for Sean McDermott and Josh Allen. And so expectations are high, especially given how this team played in the playoffs, especially Josh Allen, right? There's a lot of hype here. And so I got a great comment on YouTube from a viewer who said, look, Joe, you've really hyped up this football team. Can you maybe talk about some of the pitfalls, some of the things that could go wrong that we need to be mindful of? And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to acknowledge some of those concerns for this team and what the stumbling blocks could be that would prevent the Bills from reaching their goals. And so the best way I know how to do this is kind of look at each position and talk about that prevailing thought in my mind that could be a stumbling block for the Bills reaching their goals this year. Now, one thing that I'm not going to include, but I'm going to mention right now is just kind of a blanket statement. The most significant component in terms of identifying pitfalls or stumbling blocks or things that could go wrong, it's injuries. Josh Allen gets hurt. We have a different outlook for the season, right? Injuries are going to play a huge part in it. And so that will be the only time I mention it because it's an obvious one, right? We're going to talk about non-injury reasons why the Bills could have some issues this year and maybe not meet the expectations that the preseason hype has earned them. So let's work through it position by position. We will start with quarterback. And I think the biggest concern that I would have for the Bills quarterbacks this year, and by that I mean Josh Allen, is not really anything to do with Josh Allen so much as it would be just adjusting to a new offensive coordinator in Ken Dorsey. And not just a new offensive coordinator, but a lot of new pieces. You're talking about replacing a lot of targets from last year's offense that went to Emmanuel Sanders and went to Cole Beasley and distributing them to other players. And maybe that's a good thing in some ways, but the reality is there's newness here. Scheme, play caller, personnel. And that's everywhere. That's at every position offensively. There's new pieces around Josh Allen. And so I think acknowledging that there's not as much continuity as there's been for Josh year over year, and he's going to have to adjust. Can he do it? Yeah, absolutely. I have high expectations for this offense. You've heard me talk about it. But if we want to talk about pitfalls and stumbling blocks and focus on quarterbacks, to me, it is that adjustment. And the Bills' schedule early is pretty tough. Those first 6-7 games, a lot of good football teams. And so You don't want to put yourself in a spot where you're climbing out of a hole. And I know that there's a nice opportunity in that middle of the schedule to go on a run, which the Bills have taken advantage of, right? The last 2 years, they've went on some significant runs. Think about last year, the Bills were the 7-6, right, after the Tampa Bay game. 7-6. They went on the run to end the year, right, and position themselves. They went 11-6 and won the division. Think about coming out of that Cardinals loss in 2020. The Bills went on a big-time run and won the division. So the Bills are more than capable of going on runs and getting out of a hole. But that doesn't mean you want to see it, especially when you consider some of those early season games against the Dolphins, against the Chiefs, against the Ravens, against the Titans. Key AFC matchups, you don't really have time to not hit the ground running. And the offense last year, with all the continuity that it had, Brian Daboll year 4, they weren't crisp to start the year. And so the Bills have to overcome that this year. And so that's my concern for the quarterback position. It's not so much Josh Allen as it is acclimating to everything that's new around him. Let's look at the running back position. 2 things come to mind here when you think of stumbling blocks for this Bills running back room. The first one is a switch to a zone rushing offense. Could that be problematic? Devin Singletary played his best football last year, and that's when the Bills were a gap rushing scheme predominantly, and when he was the focal point of the backfield. Well, now you expect there to be other backs involved, but also a switch stylistically in terms of scheme. How do they adjust to that, right? That's something we need to be mindful of. And we need to be mindful that the depth behind Devin Singletary is really unproven. We're optimistic about James Cook, but the guy's never played a down in the NFL. Zach Moss, what has he proven to this point in the league? Duke Johnson, he's kind of been an afterthought for the NFL over the last couple of off seasons. So when I think about the running back position, I think about the switch in scheme and just the overall depth being unproven. Those are the things that, hey, if I'm forcing myself to find the concerns, that's what I would focus my attention around. Let's go to wide receiver. To me, the item here is just counting on guys to take a step and or relying on unknowns. So you have Stefon Diggs. We're comfortable there. But you're counting on Gabriel Davis assuming that number 2 spot and potentially coming close to doubling his targets. Probably 110, 15 or so targets, right? Coming for Gabriel Davis. The 109 targets that went to Cole Beasley are going to be redistributed to guys like Gabe Davis, to tight ends more, to Isaiah McKenzie / Jamison Crowder. And so that's new, right? You have a player that hasn't proven himself as a number 2 receiver, and you have slot options that haven't proven themselves in this offense, including a guy in Isaiah McKenzie who's been around but has never provided any consistent, meaningful production. So that's my concern at receiver. It's just you're counting on guys to take a step, and you're relying on some unknown variables or unproven variables to make up for the production that you had leave. At tight end, to me, it comes back to a potential lack of tight end depth. So we've romanticized about becoming more multiple with formations and personnel groupings and having more 2 and 3 tight end sets. Well, if you don't have the tight end depth, then that's going to limit those opportunities to incorporate some of those evolutionary items for this offense. I'm optimistic about O.J. Howard, but reports haven't been good so far. And let's be honest, he's not necessarily met expectations to this point in his NFL career. He's had some good moments, but he's had some injuries, right? He's been unproven. He might not have a ton of confidence. And so that has to happen. It has to materialize. And I don't think the Bills have a whole lot else behind O.J. Howard and Dawson Knox. I'm not in a position right now where I'm counting on anything from Tommy Sweeney or Quentin Morris or Jalen Weidermeyer. So does the question marks with the depth kind of limit some of this excitement that we've had for how this tight end group can help evolve this offense. Let's go to the offensive line. Couple of different things here that we can get into. First of all, right tackle. What's going on there? Spencer Brown, Tommy Doyle, David Quessenberry. I mean, do you have a guy? Do you have a guy that you like at right tackle? And if you don't, well, then what does that say about your depth? So you potentially have a weak link there at right tackle, but also even more concerning is that you don't love your depth in terms of that swing guy that's going to play right or left tackle. Now, I'm not saying that I don't have confidence in Spencer Brown or David Quessenberry or even Tommy Doyle, but those guys still have a lot to prove. I mean, David Quessenberry had a pretty good year for the Titans last year, but I know that he had some issues in pass protection. Spencer Brown had some inconsistency. We have no idea what Tommy Doyle is. So is right tackle an issue? Hopefully not, but as we sit here and identify potential pitfalls, that is something that comes to mind for me. And then just kind of an early storyline for the Bills training camp outside of Isaiah McKenzie or the defense looking good and all those things we've talked about is that this offensive line, it's got to come together, right, under Coach Cromer. Right now, through 4 practices, Deion Dawkins has had 4 different left guards in 4 days of practice. Saffold's got the rib thing. Ryan Bates didn't practice for an unknown reason. They've tinkered with Greg Manns and Cody Ford and Tommy Doyle in multiple spots. Quessenberry's played 3 different spots already. So there's good and bad with it, right? The good is that you get some exposures. You get to see guys in different spots. You're more ready for the inevitable shifts that have to come during the course of a season where there's injuries and stuff like that. But also, as you work towards this offensive line gelling and coming together and 5 guys working together as one, especially with an offense where you have a quarterback like Josh Allen who's going to be all over the place in terms of his launch points, and you want to have this zone rushing attack, which is really based on timing and guys flowing together to block areas. At what point are we going to have the Bills' preferred 5 guys getting that opportunity to work together and develop time on task so they can go out and execute at a high level? So as I consider the Bills' offensive line, these are the prevailing thoughts in my mind as to, hey, these could be stumbling blocks. And so just to kind of tie a ribbon on the offense, and maybe this is something that I could apply to the stuff that I'm going to get into defensively as well, is it might not be any one of the things that I just mentioned. It might not be one of those things, but maybe it's a little bit of some of them, right? A little bit of some of them is more likely. Like all the stuff I just talked about are not going to be concerns. A lot of that stuff is going to take care of itself. But what if you have 3 of those things that wind up being minor concerns? Can you have a bunch of minor concerns that turn into, okay, these are the actual major concern. The major concern is that we have a lot of minor concerns. And I think you could do this for any football team. You can do this for any football team. But as we force ourselves to look at this Bills roster and talk about the pitfalls, these are the things that we have to get into. And one thing that I don't want to ever be true about this podcast is that you feel like you come on here and you get a Bills cheerleader just talking about how great this football team is. I've prided myself in being objective about this football team. I don't hide from being a Buffalo Bills fan. Hello, look at me. I love the Buffalo Bills. I'm a diehard. But I also want to be able to have very good conversations about this football team. And fortunately, they're really good. The Bills have been awesome for the last several years. There's a lot of great things to talk about. So there's not a lot of room to get into some of these negative things. But I don't want you guys to ever confuse me as a host that can't see some of the issues and be realistic and honest and objective about talking about this football team, even if I am a fan. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, From live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts, they have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening now. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. All right, let's talk about some of the defensive side of the football items to get into here. And we'll go to defensive end first. I think this one's pretty easy. It's just that the young guys don't take a step. I feel comfortable about what the Bills are going to get from Von Miller. I feel comfortable with the baseline skill set that Greg Rousseau demonstrated as a rookie. But there's still a whole lot of snaps to be played by other football players. And a lot of those are going to be claimed by Boogie Basham and AJ Epinesa. And last year can't be as good as those players will be. And I don't think it's fair to say that they will, but as you have to commit a lot of snaps to those players, what are you getting? And I don't think you can sit here and assume that they're going to be better. And so one of the pitfalls for this defense, specifically defensive end, is those young guys don't take the step needed to claim the amount of snaps that they're about to get. Now, I like that you have Shaq Lawson as kind of a hedge there, but you certainly love to see a couple of second-round picks, a couple of recent second-round picks in Epinesa and Basham really make a difference this year in a rotational capacity. At defensive tackle, I feel really comfortable with Ed Oliver. I feel really comfortable with Daquan Jones. I mean, Jones is a very consistent, proven player for like a long time in the NFL. I mean, he would really have to fall off, and I don't expect that to happen. But you still, like I said, at defensive end, you have other snaps going to other players. Jordan Phillips has not played a lot of football over the last 2 seasons because he's been injured. So can he be healthy and can he make an impact? Well, there's going to be a lot of snaps for him to play. And then with Tim Settle, very excited about him. He's been good in flashes for Washington. But what if more opportunity for Tim Settle doesn't lead to more production, right? We still need to see what this guy can do with a bigger role. And he's going to have that opportunity this year. But we've seen him succeed in small doses. Well, what does that look like when you're given more opportunity? Let's go to linebacker. 2 things written down here. First of all, that missed tackles remain an issue for Matt Milano, and Tremaine Edmonds' improvement in terms of tackling last year reverts back to what he's been in the past, right? We talked about this. Matt Milano, he's been about a 13% missed tackle rate for his career, and every year it's right at about that mark. Not a whole lot of ebbs and flows. Like, the dude misses too many tackles. And then for Tremaine Edmonds, he got that down to around 7%, which is, you know, you can live with that. But hopefully he doesn't go back to that plus 10% that he's been at in his career. So hopefully that's kind of my first thing with the linebackers, is that they have missed tackles, which have been a problem for this defense for several years now. The other thing is that maybe there's not any meaningful depth at linebacker. Maybe Terrell Dodson's not that effective of a player. Who knows what Terrell Bernard's going to be as a rookie? We're optimistic. Reports have been good. I like the role that they're envisioning for him and what he can mean for the defense, but guy's never played a snap in the NFL. What if there's not any meaningful depth at linebacker? Potentially a concern. Let's move on to cornerback. And I know that I said I wouldn't talk about injuries because I'm not going to predict injuries, but there is an injury, right? Trey White. Yeah. What's he like when he comes back? When does he come back? We're optimistic. Maybe he plays week 1. I still think there's a decent chance we don't see him until after the bye. What if he's out for the first 6-7 games of the season? And with that, there are growing pains from a rookie in Kyer Elam and issues with Dane Jackson as a number 1 corner. We've heard a lot of good things about the depth. Saron Neal, Cam Lewis. But it's going to be a big assignment for these guys. What if there's growing pains. I expect there will be. How significant are they? At safety, look, this is what I'll tell you what my notes honestly say about safety. It says I can't get myself there. Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer are so proven together, right? They've been awesome since 2017. And if I'm not going to bring up injuries, what am I going to bring up? Do you have any concern about what Hyde and Poyer are going to be? What caliber of play they're going to deliver? The only concern would be injury. Those guys are consummate pros. You know exactly what you're getting. They're high-level players. They're big-time leaders. They're everything you want in professional football players. So I can't get myself to force something here at safety. Outside of injuries, I just don't have any concerns about Poyer and Hyde. Those guys are friggin' awesome. Now, I do have stuff to get into with special teams. How about the return situation, especially punt returner? Do the Bills have a punt returner? Wasn't a good situation last year. Inconsistency handling the football from Stevenson and McKenzie. Muffs. Decision-making problems. And you don't want to have turnovers when you force a punt. You don't want to miss opportunities with field position and make it harder for your offense to score points and potentially put your defense in less than favorable situations. Unfortunately, the Bills' plan at punt returner is hoping that one of these guys that struggled throughout their careers last year, right, like McKenzie and Stevenson, that somehow they're different this year, or that Tavon Austin, who's not necessarily been super consistent fielding punts, or that Khalil Shakir can get the job done. I've heard it said that hope isn't a plan. Well, that's kind of what the Bills are doing at punt returner. I can see this as a pitfall of this team and costing them at times. How about at punter? The concern at punter is like, what concessions do the Bills have to make, right? What concessions do they have to make? If you go with Matt Hawk, we know that he's a world-class holder, right? What he meant to Jason Sanders in Miami, what Jason Sanders looked like without Matt Hawk, and obviously the great season that Tyler Bass had last year. And thinking about if Corey Bojorquez wasn't the holder in Bass's rookie year, how much better is he? Does he miss those extra points early on? Probably not. So do you have to live with the shanks and the lack of distance on kicks that you saw from Matt Hawk last year and throughout his career to make sure that you have a good holding operation for your field goal team? Or do you go with Matt Araiza and live with the inconsistency that I think you're going to get as a punter? He's going to have the big, massive, booming punts that are going to flip the field, and we're all going to love it. But he's going to have line drives, and we know he doesn't have good control. So you're going to have touchbacks. So do you have to live with inconsistent punting to have some high-level punts, but also what is he going to be as a holder? Something he's never done, right? I know that so far so good, but you can't replace years and years of experience doing that, right? He could look like $1 million right now and throughout the preseason, but there is an element of know-how and savviness and experience and time on task that is inevitably going to lead to some inconsistency. So at punter, what concessions do the Bills have to make? Because I think they're going to have to make a concession regardless of who they go with. And it's annoying to me because this is professional football, and I don't think you have to make those concessions. You can have a good punter who's also a good holder. But I feel like regardless of who the Bills go with, you're making some type of a concession, and you're going to have to live with inconsistency, which I take exception with this is the NFL. You should be able to get a punter that can hold and be good at both of those things. Going on to kicker. I don't have a whole lot of concerns about Tyler Bass, but what if Bass has some struggles as a result of inconsistent holding? And maybe you're laughing at that, but look at Jason Sanders. Jason Sanders was an all-pro kicker in 2020 with Matt Hawk as his holder. He was phenomenal. The next year, the Miami Dolphins, with Jason Sanders as their kicker and Michael Pilardi as their punter/holder, the Miami Dolphins had the lowest field goal made percentage in the league. What's the difference? Matt Hawk. So don't smirk at this. That's a real possibility. That if Matt Araiza wins the job and he's not a consistent holder, that it has a negative impact on Tyler Bass. So like I said, I don't have more to get into. That's kind of a wrap on the position-by-position look. And what I said after the offensive segment was, look, maybe it's not one thing, but it's a little bit of some of it, right? Maybe it's not any one of these things being the stumbling block, but it's a little bit of some of it. Maybe your major concern is that you have a lot of minor concerns. See how it comes together. The Bills have several weeks of practice and camp and preseason games to kind of iron this stuff out. But if you were to pin me down and ask me to reveal the biggest concerns that I have about this team and what the stumbling blocks could be, that's the stuff that I came up with. And so this feels like a gloomy podcast, and it's certainly not an uplifting, encouraging message for me to send you into the weekend with, but I think it was important for us to look at the team through this lens so that we are comprehensive and objective on this podcast. The next time I'll speak to you will be on Monday, and we're going to have a lot to reflect on. The Bills have practices coming up on Friday and Saturday. The pads come on Saturday. We will have plenty of storylines to get to the next time I am in your YouTube feed and in your podcast feed. So make sure that you are subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to catching up with you again on Monday.